Guys, welcome back to another BigLipz podcast. My name is Catherine Maurice, and with me is Sam Macaulay Blair. Um, Basically, just to give a wee
Hello.
bit of background, we are two kind of former and current film students, um, who were basically looking for something exciting to do during lockdown when we weren't allowed to leave the house. So this is what we came up with. So this is episode 6, and this week we are going to be focusing on CGI. And this was my choice this week, which is funny because I'm not normally a massive fan of CGI. I'm not a massive fan of like CGI heavy movies or anything like that. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of go through a couple of different things like best, worst, etc., stuff like that. So basically, your structure will be similar to last week's because I just unashamedly stole Sam's structure. So yeah, so basically the first section that we're going to be talking about is obviously this will be very subjective because it's just our example of the best or the worst, etc. So I think it'll be interesting because Sam and I don't know each other's choices, so that'll be fun. So as I said, the first one we're going to do is what we think the best example of CGI is. Whether that's a certain scene, a particular movie, or whatever. So I'll let you jump in.
Cheers. So obviously with this one, I've sort of come up with a couple answers. The first of which, like my first pick, is probably one of the more obvious ones, one of the more recent ones. But it was one that is like sort of probably like the most recent one that I can think of, like leaving a genuine like big impression. Which would be Thanos in the Avengers movies. Because I remember seeing basically like trailers and stuff for it, and I think they sort of like had glimpses of Thanos in like the other Marvel movies. And I wasn't very convinced. And Marvel sort of like famously has like a bad reputation for mishandling villains. And yeah, I kind of felt like given that they tend to be like a little bit poorly written. And given that the way he kind of looked from trailers and just from the other movies, I kind of thought like, okay, like he's not going to be, he's just going to be a bit of like a weak sort of CGI character that's in there as like a bit of muscle to just, he's really there just to sort of like propel the plot. I mean, at the end of the day, they know everyone's coming to see like these like huge team ups of like all these superheroes that have never been done before. But yeah, I remember going to see Infinity War in the cinema back when that was a possibility. And just yeah, like obviously right from the start, it opens with a sort of very CGI heavy sequence, and yeah, really really sort of introduces Thanos, and the whole film Infinity War really is his film. He is written as the main character. He is like the sort of heart and soul of the film, weirdly enough, which you would just never expect from like from like a sort of team up movie of that scale. You wouldn't expect
Yeah.
there to be so much emphasis and care on the villain, and the fact that yeah they used like it's obviously motion capture with like some CGI effects, and the fact that they make him so convincing, and you really like buy into and care about this character, I think is genuinely like a really really impressive feat. And I mean obviously Marvel has the money, but you would kind of imagine part of you would imagine that there's already enough set pieces going on, and there's already enough actors involved
Yeah.
that a good portion of that budget is going to be immediately swallowed on premise alone, basically. So yeah, again, like the effects in like the sort of the two Infinity War and Endgame are all sort of outstanding anyway. But yeah, in particular, Thanos really, really stood out to me as just like I had so little faith in him working, and it was genuinely like yeah, I really appreciated just like every single scene he's in. Every time I was kind of like, wow,
Yeah.
they've done it.
That's funny because
Um,
I've not seen like all of the movies that he's in. Shocker. But
I know.
I do think it's funny because he does Thanos kind of looks like, I can't remember the actor's name, the actor that plays him.
Josh Brolin.
Yeah, so there's like a little bit of him in
Yeah.
there, which is always really nice. Like I always thought that about the Jungle Book when they re-released that, and the King Louis. There was a wee.
Yeah.
He looked like Christopher Walken, and it was
A
weird.
little. Yeah, I know what you mean. Actually, that was like kind of unsettling. Probably more so for Christopher Walken as well.
Yeah, I think that worked though, especially
but
because he's kind of like villainy in that movie, and obviously Thanos is the villain, so it's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly, and I think it's again even just going back to the whole like sort of fundamental structure of that film and the fact that you have like all these sort of like heroes teaming up, and you obviously need like a sort of compelling opposing force to obviously justify the sort of existence of the film, and you really like the movie could have so easily fallen apart if you just didn't believe in the sort of realism of that character. And again, he's a giant purple man from outer space, so they really did have like a bit of an uphill battle. But yeah, even as you say, like actually managing to really get like a lot of Josh Brolin in there, it means that like there is like a nuance to like his performance that again you just don't really expect, especially not like just because it's like so CGI heavy, but also even just like the type of film, you don't expect there to really be any sort of depth. So yeah, like I think like in terms of writing, but really the effects are what like props Thanos up, and what makes him like you just there was like no point in the film that I was like that's a computer effect. Which is it's kind of funny because apparently I've got a friend who was telling me recently that he was watching some behind the scenes stuff on those movies, and apparently there's I think it's one of the I don't know if it's a fight scene or like a dialogue scene. I don't know when it happens. I would imagine it's maybe like a more action heavy scene because people haven't really noticed it. But apparently there's a scene where I think Thanos' hand just like clips through his head. And it was the guy, one of the guys who worked on like the effects for that, who was the one who pointed it out. It was just like you could just see his hand going through his face. And apparently I think he said he was like no one seems to have noticed it, but apparently the first time he noticed that being in the film was when they were like at the premiere. And it obviously like that's all he could think about for the rest of the film was the fact that had happened.
That's
and
so
he was obviously
would you tell anyone?
Exactly. He said that he was so relieved that like no one was talking about it afterwards, but it's just like it's completely poisoned his experience of that film because it's always in there now.
That's
like
so
there's
sad.
nothing you can do. I know, exactly, especially like the amount of time and like there must have like blood, sweat and tears that must have been put into like realizing those effects, and to just see like something like that on opening night when you should really just be like sitting back and being like, oh, it's all done, all this work's done, I could be proud of it. To just notice
so
like
true.
a mistake you've made is got to really be a kick in the teeth.
It must be like you must have just instantly started sweating like, oh my god, is there anything else that's made it sweat in?
That's a very good point, actually.
Like he's sitting
it's like,
completely tense
he's noticed
for
that.
the rest
Like,
of the movie, like, oh my god.
Does the render just drop?
Exactly.
Like, one point it's just Josh Brolin walking around. Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
motion capture dots on his face.
It's also, I guess it's... Exactly. I guess there's also like a kind of like nice security in knowing as well that like a movie with that many like pairs of eyes on them, and that big in scale and that sort of intense and heavy in production, it's kind of it's almost like relaxing or soothing in a way to know that mistakes like that still
That's
happen.
true, yeah.
Like something like that wouldn't be possible. It doesn't really matter like the size or the quality of your production team. Like people always like make fumbles, and like sometimes they can get really, really far.
I know, that's crazy. That's such a good point.
So Thanos is my first sort of major pick because again, he was just a recent example that I thought stood out, and obviously the recency bias kind of helps, but also my lack of faith beforehand. And for my second pick, I've gone for a slightly older film. I mean, when you're talking about CGI, the time scale is very different to obviously if you're talking about films in general. But yeah, my other pick was District 9, which the Neil Blomkamp film, which I remember being quite funny. You talked about Avatar last week or last podcast, and I remember obviously on the lead up to Avatar being released, there just being all this talk about the photorealistic CGI of Avatar and like how good the effects were going to be and how effects heavy it was, and all being about that, and like James Cameron was pioneering all this stuff, and District 9 came out sort of quietly like a few months before it, and I remember genuinely sitting in the cinema of that, and I was like, my God, like the CGI on like on those prawns looks so convincing, and I think District 9 had a pretty modest budget. It was obviously like sort of filmed almost like sort of faux documentary style, and yeah, it's just out like again with the way that they kind of the filming of it kind of helps, I imagine. But given the fact that like I know that I think that Neil Blomkamp and Peter Jackson I think produced it, and they were originally like a few years before it going to make a Halo movie, and then that kind of fell through, and they ended up like reusing props. Yeah, they ended up reusing props for that for District 9. I think District 9 was very much kind of like cobbled together in a lot of ways. So for that to actually have like effects as good as it did or does, I think was legitimately impressive, especially because no one was really making a fuss about it. So almost like that stood out so much more, and it always kind of comes to mind when I just think of like really like photo. And it's funny because like I don't think CGI just now is that like photorealistic, and we're like 12 years it's like 12 years later. You kind of assume these things are going to keep like rolling and rolling and rolling, and you're going to get to a point where like, you know, you would, if you'd asked me back in 2009 what effects were like in 2021, I'd be like, you wouldn't be able to tell, but you still definitely can. And I think like you could watch District 9 just now, and yeah, so easily like I think it will always sort of stand the test of time, which, you know, sort of CGI heavy films really run the risk of not doing.
No, that's a really good pick, because like you were saying, I only saw it the first time maybe a couple of years ago, and I knew of its existence, but I wasn't massively buzzing to watch it, just because I thought, oh God, that sounds not very good. And then I watched it basically, and you're right, it was, the things were so realistic, and even the bit like towards the end with the main character, it was just so, like, it was so good. It definitely like added to the story, because sometimes CGI is really like jarring and obvious, and it completely takes you out of it. Like you were saying, your fear with Thanos.
Yeah.
But no, that was definitely
exactly.
Yeah. Oh. No, that was good.
Yeah, no, I guess yeah, like you're saying.
So basically, I kind of cheated with my one, and I didn't pick a film. I actually picked a filmmaker. I've got two options, so I'll do another one. So basically, I went for David Fincher, which is a weird choice.
Okay, very interesting choice.
And I thought it was a really good choice, because he's not someone that you would typically be like, oh yeah, he does CGI heavy movies. But nope. I think his use of CGI is perfect. Like, it's exactly what CGI should be. Whereas you don't really realise it's there, but it's used to like flesh out environments and like different characters. And so, for example, there's like in Social Network with the twins. Obviously, I remember, because Armie Hammer wasn't massive when that came out. And I remember a lot of people thinking that he was Outset of Twins. And I'm sure I read somewhere that he didn't just do take Armie Hammer's face and put it on another actor. He did like a whole kind of like 3D picturing thing of it, so that wherever the stunt actor was moving, his face would fit perfectly on it, and it wouldn't look really like out of place. Like, do you remember that bit? I haven't seen the movie, but I've seen the clip of one of the Fast and Furious movies, you know, at the end, when it's like Paul Walker's in the car, but it was after he died. Yeah, but the CGI is awful. Like, his face is facing this way, but the face is like straight on like that.
Oh no, I've never seen it either. So yeah, I just remember there was like a song that played over that scene, that was like top of the charts for ages that summer, and it was so overplayed. Yeah. Thanks, Vin Diesel.
I know. Thanks for that. So the first kind of thing that because Fincher did Panic Room, obviously, and I remember reading that he does, like, he built the set in a really specific way so that they could take parts out of it and stuff like that, so the camera could move up the stairs.
Okay.
But then he'd use CGI to like put the banister back in, basically. So definitely think his use of CGI is obviously I'm biased because I do like Fincher as a director, but I think his use of CGI is exactly what it should be, whereas it's not like you don't even know that it's there, but it's like almost like world building, and it definitely enhances the story, and it just like really immerses you in the story. I thought it was funny as well. I was looking into it, and obviously Fincher's notorious for doing like 500 takes per whatever it is he's doing. And I read that he doesn't ever use like real blood when he's shooting anything. It's the blood is always CGI, and it's so that he can reset really quickly and just keep shooting and shooting and shooting. So funny.
That's actually so clever. And just in general, like you're saying, like it's not something that would ever have occurred to me or I'd ever have thought of. But yeah, it's such a good choice, and for the reasons you've already explained, obviously. But just the fact that like it's, as you said, it's exactly how CGI should be used. And it's really just like being really clever in your craft and going, okay, well, like, what do I have at my disposal, and how can I become more efficient, and how can I make this sort of more real, and how can I do things that other filmmakers maybe aren't doing. And sort of, I guess, he's using it to sort of chase that element of like perfectionism as well, and detail, and it's genuinely like, and as you say, like it makes his movies. He means he can do more with them and make them more immersive, make more immersive environments and sets, and you're not limited anymore by like, okay, well, we can only shoot this scene from these couple angles because we don't have a room. We've got like 2 walls. And yeah, it's so much like, as you say, like you would never notice it, that it's there. And even like the Armie Hammer thing, like you were saying, I'm pretty sure I constantly hear people like just referring to them as like a pair of actors in that film. And yeah, not realizing that it's just the one guy, and they've used effects as well to do it. And even just to think of doing that, or to actually like to bother doing that is, I think, quite brave, because most other filmmakers would be like, we're just going to find an easier, or maybe like they would immediately think of what's an easier way, we'll just get a guy that looks like him, but it works so well in the context of the social network, and you don't ever think that's an effect, you just totally buy that it's 2 people.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's funny as well because I think his use of CGI is so like, he uses it as a tool for like to make the details more, like his attention to detail is crazy. So I read as well, in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Lisbeth's got like a little part in her fringe, and he like CGI'd that in so that it was consistent over the whole, because they were shooting over 2 or 3 days. Like, that's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, again, just like I guess you would imagine if he'd lived longer and had really kind of like been making films today in particular, you imagine that's the sort of thing that Stanley Kubrick would do. Would just like, you'd still probably be an absolute nutter on set, but at the same time you probably would like, I would imagine that his films would go out without a single mistake, because he would probably obsessively pore over every frame they've shot, and he'd been like, well, we can't reshoot this, but we can fix it in post.
I like to think that David Fincher just comes up with an idea. He's got in his head so clearly what he wants it to look like, so he's like, we're just going to make it happen. Like, if we can't do the practicals, we'll just fix it in post.
Yeah, exactly. I know, and it's just such a clever way of using that tool. And yeah, again, it's like, it really is the point, isn't it? It can be so easy. So many movies, like Michael Bay, for instance, is
that was so funny, because when I was talking about Fincher at the start, I was like, you could be like Michael Bay.
Exactly, he is the complete antithesis of it, where he's almost like, come and see my movies because there's going to be loads of explosions and cool effects and great CGI, or there's obviously just like this overabundance of it. In particular, like the Transformers film, and like it's so nice to have like the other side of that, with Fincher just being like, well, I'm not interested in doing that at all. I'm not interested in making that kind of movie. I would rather have CGI in there, but have it like so subtly in there that like you're never going to have an audience talk about it. They're not even aware that they're looking at effects. And it's just,
I found out that the blood in Zodiac It was, sorry, I forgot the name of the movie there. That the blood in that was all fake, and I was honestly, I was watching it again and I was like, is it? And it was just so good.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you're making me want to watch more of his films and rewatch the films of his that I've seen just to kind of hunt for that
Yeah.
to see, yeah, like if I can tell at any point that isn't a fact. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, like the job of the film is really just to immerse you and to sort of like deliver its story and to really get you to buy into that world. Like everything is sort of in service of that, and yeah, like the fact that you like you have to be told that he's done this. You've not. I wonder. I genuinely wonder if there's anyone who's watched one of his films and gone, "That's an effect," and
Yeah.
not just been like completely like immersed in the whole thing. So yeah, he's really obviously found a really clever way of doing his job to like the highest sort of standards. And when you talk about it, you kind of just think, why is he like, why is that not the norm? Why is he like
Yeah.
the only one who's really thought of this?
Yeah, it's like, it's almost like, because he's notorious for doing loads of takes, it's almost like, can people just not be bothered? Like, that seems like loads
Exactly.
of effort.
Get
Whereas
it
we
one.
could just,
So,
we could
well,
just make crazy CGI and it'll look fine.
exactly.
It's funny.
But yeah, very good choice.
Thank you. So, moving on swiftly, speaking of terrible choices with CGI, our next topic is our picks for the worst CGI, which was actually probably the easiest one to write about because there's so many examples. So yeah, Sam, I'll let you go first.
So once again, I've got a couple of examples, and yeah, I like you said, there are so many examples, and it was yeah, genuinely sort of difficult to pick ones. I guess pick ones that like there was a lot that I've maybe seen more recently or seen bits of. Like I think there's like a lot of films that like I've seen sort of clips of and stuff, and I was like, well, I feel like it'd almost be cheating, even though I wouldn't, to pick a film that I've not really seen, and just start dunking on that.
Yep.
So I went with, again, just sort of like two choices of films that I've watched and just have like sort of vivid memories of going kind of whoa. And the first one was the Hugh Jackman starring Wolverine Origins movie, the X-Men film, just because like I even kind of like looked up some screenshots of the film, it just sort of like just because I was like, is it as bad as I think it is? Well, I wasn't brave enough to rewatch the whole thing, but there's like a picture of him and he's like holding up his hand and he's got the claws coming out, but it literally looks like someone has like, and not even done it well, but really poorly, just drag and dropped like the images of his claws on it. And it's just like they made like 3 X-Men films before this.
Yeah, where they looked fine.
How did yeah, how do you get worse at doing this? It's so bizarre. I remember being in school after seeing the movie, and like I remember talking to a guy, I think it was in home ec, and he was saying about going to see it, and he was like yeah, there was like a fight scene and you can literally see like the wires on the actor, and I was like, this is like a 14-year-old kid who's like noticing these things.
That's crazy.
It's just so like appallingly bad. But again, that also came out in 2009, and that I think was like the sort of peak of early 2000s, was really just like a sort of journey of like filmmakers going, oh my god, computer effects, we can do anything, we can do everything. Yep. And I guess like, yeah, there probably was like that confidence and that cockiness of like, yeah, well, effects are getting better, technology's getting better and better, so like we can just like probably leaning more and more into post-production and putting like a bigger burden on their shoulders. But yeah, there are obviously films that kind of collapse under it, and yeah, like the Wolverine obviously is certainly one. And it's kind of funny now as well within the context of like, because that movie is just kind of like, yeah, like a disaster and quite sort of like silly and looks really poor. And if you sort of look at it as a trilogy of like the Wolverine movies that he did, between like that, the Wolverine, and then Logan, It's just like such a such a sort of funny like transition, because like by Logan it's like the least effects heavy one. It's mostly like them just sort of in the desert or like on a farm kicking about, and it's so sort of like it then becomes like really sort of a really somber film and a really sort of like heavy, like bleak adult, more like adult movie. It's just funny as like a transition to go from like if you were to watch all three back to back, which I imagine as people have done because they've never seen them before and they sit down to watch them, it must really be a journey that you go on quite quickly in the span of like a few hours.
That's true. That's such a good point.
And hopefully it wins you round by the end. You probably enjoy the last one so much more because you've gone through the first one, and you just like your expectations would be an all-time low.
That's so funny. But I know exactly the bit you're talking about. Is he not like in the bathroom? And he's like inspecting his clothes for the first time.
Yeah, he literally is. Yeah, it's for the first time as well. It's like the big moment about the claws. It's like that's if ever there's a scene where you need to put the effort into the claws, it's the first time he sees them.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because he then cuts a sink in half, and
yeah. I love that because, like, you know, you see those pictures of people like in their budget Wolverine costumes, and they've got literally like a fork coming out. That would have been better than what they had if they just had like some kitchen knives coming out.
Exactly. Like, surely it can't be that difficult. Apparently, remember, this is like such a weird thing to remember as well. Like, I've like remember reading, I think it was Odeon used to do like little like magazines, and every time I'd go to the cinema back then, I used to like pick one up because it would just have like I think the next month sort of movies in it, and there'd be like sort of small snippets and like interviews and stuff. And I remember there being like an interview with Hugh Jackman, and he talked so much about the fact he was like, I feel like I'm personally to blame for like the ozone layer and global warming because of how much hairspray we used on like me during the making of that film. So they were, it seems like they were putting more effort into hairspraying his hair than they were giving Wolverine his claws, which is just insane. Like, just if you're gonna be there hairspraying his hair, just glue some like rubber claws on. It will look better than what they went with.
I like to think that maybe they're like hairspray you can get for like £1, couple of £1 a tin, or CGI, which is really expensive. So we'll just make sure the hair looks amazing and it'll distract everyone.
That's what everyone will be talking about when the film's done.
Exactly.
Wow, Hugh Jackman's hair in that film. They absolutely nailed that. Yeah, no, I know. As if that movie needs like other things to be talked about, but yeah, the effects are awful. And yeah, for my other choice, I've gone for not a Marvel or superhero film this time, although kind of close. And this is probably a more obscure one. It's a film called, I couldn't even tell you when it came out, but it's a film called Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow. And I must have watched, I think I watched it probably around the same time as like I saw the Wolverine, like within like a couple years of that at least, because I remember being like youngish. And it's such a strange film. It's like a sort of like almost like sci-fi World War II action film, but like the whole film, it seems like was just filmed in front of a green screen.
Oh yeah. Who's
it? It's really. I'm pretty sure Jude Law's in it. Yeah, I know. I honestly couldn't tell you. I think the actors that were in it were all actually like fairly big. I couldn't tell you anyone else that was in it because like, honestly, when I think of that movie. And you know, you think back to most movies, usually you remember scenes, usually you remember like even moments, or like you just in that movie all I can remember is the background, and it's so weird. Like it's just like, I think even if I didn't realize I was doing it, I think I was just like not once looking at the actors or what was going on, but just constantly looking in the background going, oh, this looks a bit fake.
Yeah, I hate that. It's so distracting.
It's exactly. Like I couldn't ever buy into the film, and it doesn't help that like again kind of the opposite of Fincher, where it's like they're in like huge like hangars and stuff like that, and I'm just like it just looks like you're standing in front of a screen. Like
Yeah.
you've used effects to try and make it look like you're in this massive environment, and it couldn't have had like more of the opposite effect, where it just makes the whole movie look so small. I think. Even though I said it wasn't going to be a Marvel film or a superhero film, to sort of tie into that, because I've just remembered this. I don't actually know if it was the same director, but the first Captain America film, weirdly enough, I remember sitting in the cinema and seeing that. I think it was the same director that did it.
Oh, yeah?
And that very much had like, there's scenes in that. I think again there's like a scene in a hangar. It's just always the hangers that they get wrong. Where I remember like just having like a moment of just something like hit, and I like remembered the film, and I was like, this really reminds me of Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, and it's not something I ever want to be reminded of when I'm watching a film.
That's hilarious. I bet no one else has ever uttered that phrase.
I'll find someone.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make everyone watch this film. I have a really horrible feeling that the DVD of it is in the house somewhere.
Amazing.
Which means that I think someone must have bought it not knowing. I think someone this like my family must have bought it, hopefully not knowing what it was and not having seen it, because like I'd be really upset if I learned that they just were a huge Sky Captain fan and they had
That's
to own the
hilarious.
DVD.
Like when you go into your grand's house and there's just the most random like selection of DVDs ever that she's obviously just picked up at random. And like, yeah, that looks fine.
Exactly.
That's funny. I think it's always funny, like you're talking about how the space looks really flat. I think obviously we didn't do a lot of green screen stuff, but we did a wee bit on our course. So I think there's like that. I wasn't very good at it, but there's still that little bit where you know what it should look like, so it's even more jarring when it doesn't look like that, and you can see like a kind of slight like green tinge around the person where they haven't like blended it properly or whatever.
Yeah.
It's very funny.
Exactly. Sorted out the lighting.
Yeah, I think that's the curse of being a film student, though. Is that the minute you start to learn about it, you start to analyse everything that you watch.
It does. I think we were warned about that, weren't we? That sort of like transition that you go on between like being able to like when the course starts, like almost like being unable to enjoy films, and then eventually kind of like appreciating them in a different way.
Yeah, that is sad. That's funny. Those were good choices. My choice, it was a very like
Thank you.
Similar to your weird Sky Captain one, was really like personal. Like I remember being really young and seeing my choice is the movie Jaws 3D, and I remember being really young and
I've
watching
never
it.
seen that.
Oh, no need, absolutely no need. But there's this one particular bit, and it always sticks in my mind. And I was really, really young at the time, and it's like ingrained in my memory. And even in that young age, I thought, this is awful. Like, it looks, I could have gone out with my pals and done a better job. It looked awful. Basically, there's the one scene that I'm thinking of. It's got the shark, and he's like swimming towards this underwater place, like research place where people are. So you see it coming towards the glass, but it's just so stiff, and it just moves like that. Not one part of his body is moving. So like his tail isn't moving. I don't know how it's moving through the water. And it kind of like bobs like this. Like someone's been at the computer and is like, yep, I'll just move them like this and it'll look like it's floating. And then the funniest part is when it hits the glass. So it's moving like this, super stiff, and then it kind of stops here, and then the glass shatters, and it's just this static shark. It's so funny as well, because there's one point where its mouth kind of tries to open and close, and it's just it's awful. It's the least scary thing I've ever seen. And Jaws, like the first Jaws, is pretty scary. Like if you watched that as a child, you would probably then maybe not want to go in the sea for a while. But this movie was.
I was like 11 or 12 when I saw the first one, and it did definitely have an effect on me.
Yeah.
But yeah, what a way to turn that around.
But you should definitely, like, if people make their kids accidentally watch Jaws, just make them watch Jaws 3D immediately after, and they'll be like, do you know what? It can't be that bad.
Maybe that's what they were going for.
Maybe. I just thought it was such a funny.
Like, save the reputation of sharks.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was such a funny choice because Jaws was so good and it didn't have like it was like practical effects. There was like a whole bit of the movie where you didn't even see the shark because it was making it creepy. But they were like, yeah, let's just. It was like almost like they'd googled like great white shark, got a picture, and then just put it in the background of this scene, and moved it from here to here.
Oh,
it was amazing.
It's so funny because I'm actually really tempted to check the film out now, because that is it's one of those things, I guess, that there is like a degree of bad that a film can hit where it then becomes like you have to see it because it's so bad. And that sequence where it's attacking the research station or whatever, that sounds amazing. I want to see that on the biggest screen I can find. It
cuts between this stiff shark moving and the people in the research centre, and they're like, oh no, it's coming, and then it's just back to the shark. It's filmmaking.
It's so tragic as well because like exactly, you know that the actors are having like complete. There was so much confidence in their director and the effects team when they're on set because they're like, are you sure this is gonna look good when the movie's done, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's gonna look great.
And they've got the name as well.
They must.
The Jaws movie's amazing, and then imagine if you were like a up and coming actor and you were like, yeah, I'm gonna be in a Jaws movie. You'd be like bragging to everyone, and then they'd be like, did that movie come out? And you'd be like, no, it didn't. No need to see it.
I know, yeah. They did definitely fall from grace, the Jaws movies. I think it was I think Michael Caine is in the fourth one, and there's like a sort of famous there's like a famous interview where I've seen like people quote quite a lot in terms of like just in terms of actors that will sort of do any job and be sort of unashamed about it. And Michael Caine sort of mentioned a lot for the fact that he like admits will just really take any project if he feels like it, because like at the end of the day he needs to eat. But I think he said in relation to Jaws 4, he's like, I think someone asked him about it at a press junket once, obviously thinking, okay, this is going to be juicy because like it's a sort of famously derided movie and he's in it, so what does he think about it? Is he going to like defend it? And he was just like, yeah, I've never seen Jaws 4, but I've seen the house it built and that was lovely, and that was all he said on it. Like,
that's
fair enough.
Exactly, man, gotta eat.
Exactly.
I think that's funny, but you should definitely check that out. I actually rewatched the clip, so I'll get the clip that I watched and put it in the comments, and so that everyone can enjoy, because it's a sight to behold.
It sounds like it.
I think
I love that pick.
Yeah, just quickly, I had another one, and that was the Twilight baby in Breaking Dawn Part 2. Because that is the stuff of nightmares. And as I was looking into it, it got even funnier, because the one that I always think of was like a horrifying animatronic baby, which they nicknamed Chuck Esme because it was so horrifying.
Oh no.
Yeah. And like even the producers and the directors were like, no, it was horrifying. And I read this thing where the director shouted cut once, and the baby just moved its head and stared straight into the camera.
They should have kept that in the film.
No, do you know what? See, after seeing the CGI, I would rather have seen the horrible animatronic baby. The CGI is so, like, uncanny valley, like, it's horrifying. And it's so funny as well because... Oh, sorry?
Sorry. No, just as you were saying.
No, it's funny as well because they've obviously shot it with this animatronic baby that's big, comes up to about here, and then they've CGI'd, like, almost a newborn baby. So there's all this like dead, so the baby comes to about here, and then there's all this like dead space above this CGI baby's head, and it's just so weird.
Oh,
like,
wow.
I don't know why you didn't just make the baby the same age as Chuck Esme. I don't know.
Yeah, like it just sounds like a complete mess. I've seen three of the Twilight films. I think I've seen the first three, so I've never got as far as the baby that you're talking about. But I do actually remember being in school and people like just hearing people in class talking like before the teacher came in or whatever, and hearing them talk about like seeing Twilight, and I just remember someone going, the baby.
Yes.
And I was like, all I can remember of the conversation, but I was like, what a weird thing to say like about the film. But that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's so funny, and as well, they try to like get around the fact that it looked horrible by being like, oh, but the baby, like Renesmee, the baby is like really special. She's this, that, and the next thing. I'm like, no, that was just terrible CGI. Because you've either run out of time or money or effort, and you've thought,
Yeah, maybe that. Well, there was the whole thing, isn't there, about like Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart like hating those movies. Maybe the effects team by that point were just like, look, we don't care. It's the last one.
Maybe
like, people are gonna see it. Like,
yeah,
they're not
like,
coming for the effects. They're not coming for the baby.
Regardless. So.
I like to think it was the people that worked on Jaws 3, and that's the first job they've been offered since Jaws 3.
And they've thought, yes, another big movie. We'll redeem ourselves on this, and then it just went horribly wrong.
Exactly. Which is, as long as we get it to move, we're doing fine. Like, we've nailed it.
Exactly. It's amazing.
It's all it takes.
That's funny.
Yeah, good, very good picks.
Thank you.
A shark and a baby.
A shark and a baby.
Well, I want a spin-off. I want a film of the shark and the baby, but by the director from Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. So it's just all in front of a green screen as well.
Set in a hangar, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. There'll be one in there. He loves putting them in.
That's amazing.
Surely I think they're cheap to film in as well.
Hangars.
Yeah, you'd imagine. Like.
Yeah. Maybe they were like, can't be arsed lighting that, so.
Turning on all those, they're gonna light themselves.
That's true. You're making good points.
I'll direct the Sky Captain sequel.
Yes, I love it. I think before we move on, of course, special mention for worst CGI has to go to Henry Cavill's mustache removal. Because,
I would have been really upset if it hadn't gone in there.
Yeah. Because it's just amazing. There's nothing else to say about it. So we'll move on.
Yeah, exactly.
So our next section was, Sam, you were kind of talking about early CGI movies aren't very early. But I thought it'd be interesting to kind of look at movies that kind of maybe like pioneered a certain element of CGI or did it really well for its time. And things like that. So... Sam, I'll let you fire away.
Thank you. Again, I've gone for two really sort of obvious choices, two sort of like mainstream choices, and two quite similar choices in like some respects. And again, this is the thing with it being like a really subjective topic. It's another one of those things where these are just like things that I remember being like astonished by, and and I think. In particular, they really are partly to blame for like the CGI craze of like the noughties. But yeah, both my picks are from the noughties because I think as you sort of mentioned as well, like with CGI, it's just a different time scale than normal movies because only only came into effect quite late, and then people started getting excited about it at a particular time, and there was still a lot of new stuff being done until like. Not that long ago, really. So my first pick is the very obvious Golem from Lord of the Rings, because again, like it's still just is like such a marvel of technology, and just like with the Lord of the Rings. I mean, the whole movies in general are like such a beautiful blend of like really, like there's obviously like practical work in there. There's like obviously CGI, and there's like it's just the whole thing comes together as this like beautiful package. But it is again like such a strong example of like this that was when that came out, it really showed people what computer effects could do, what CGI could do, and make something like Middle Earth sort of come to life and make people actually really buy into that world that it would be so easy. Again, it's like so easy for that to go wrong, and there was every reason for it to go wrong, they really were like the first ones to properly do the motion capture character. I remember watching a behind the scenes featurette on with Andy Serkis talking about working on those movies and filming them, and the fact that they were obviously using, they obviously like pioneered really like the motion capture thing in a lot of ways, and he said that they would be on location or like, you know, filming, and he would be with Elijah Wood and I've forgotten the name of the guy that plays Sam, Sean Astin. He'd be with Elijah Wood and Sean Astin, and he said it was, he was obviously like in this like sort of tight leotard and sort of jumping about and doing his old Golem thing, and he said that for like the first sort of like few takes and stuff, the first sort of like bit of filming, I noticed that the actors weren't looking at him, like they were just kind of looking past him. They were just like looking at stuff sort of behind him, and he had to kind of pull them aside, and he's like, what are you doing? Like, and they just were so like, from their idea of like what CGI was and how it worked, and if, you know, maybe I imagine they probably had like the experiences from maybe like some other films where they'd used effects, and even just like in Lord of the Rings, where like generally they're using, it's you know, the actors always talk about, oh yeah, we're just staring at like a tennis ball
on a stick kind of thing.
Like, yeah, exactly. And I think they were so used to just it being like, okay, well, ignore the thing that's there. You're kind of looking past that, and it was a total novel thing. It was just like, he was like, no, like this is the performance, and I'm here for you, really. Like the whole benefit of me being here and like portraying this character in front of you is so that your performance is so much more authentic. Because you get more, being able to bounce off an actor, you're going to get more than if you are just bouncing off of like a green screen that will then get filled in later on. You know, it doesn't really matter how good the actor is. There is just always going to be something more from like a sort of face-to-face experience. But it is, like, again, the Lord of the Rings movies were such a success in so many ways. But yeah, like Golem, the impact of Golem, as he literally changed cinema, and everyone similar. I think like you think of like sort of pop famous, like really like big iconic like pop culture characters, and he's up there with like, you know, another like obvious one from films is Yoda, where just like anyone could really quote Golem or refer to Golem.
That's
and
true,
people know who he is, because even if you haven't seen those films, you still have an awareness of who Golem is, because it's just so talked about. And yeah, obviously like it's just, again, such a good, again, you know, so much credit to Andy Serkis as well for really like putting in such a good performance, and it's such a unique performance. But yeah, also to the effects team for just making you believe like every sort of, because again, it's a lot of, there's an internal struggle with him as well. It's not like he's just there and he's jumping about and he's saying stuff. He actually has to emote, and you have to sort of understand him, and they do such a good job of really conveying that. So yeah, obvious choice, but that was my first.
No, that was an interesting choice. I remember because the first time I'd seen the Lord of the Rings movies, I think I just binged like all of them. And then I remember watching something later on that had said, because he's not really in the first one, it's just kind of like almost like just like glimpses of him and things. So it was the second one where he really like came alive. But I remember watching a thing, and it had basically said that if you watch them back to back, he's like, Golem as the character that they created is so different to the one in the second movie that goes on to obviously the third movie as well. So they've obviously, I don't know if they've like realised how important he is to the story, and then they've been like, we need to make sure we get this spot on. Which I think is...
Yeah, it's a very good point actually, that he's not, he's pretty much not in the first one. I know exactly what you mean, where you see like very sort of shadowy small glimpses of him.
Yeah, I think it's shot from above, and he's like climbing up something, but you don't even see the whole of his body. It's just like a kind of like, what was that?
Exactly. I think there's a bit at the start where like you see him again, like a sort of almost like silhouette, where he's got the ring, and then as you sort of hear his voice, and I think you see his hands when he's being tortured. But yeah, he's not in it at all, basically. And that is, like you say, I guess when you watch them sort of back to back, that you almost don't think about it, because you're kind of used to seeing it or thinking about it all as one big entity.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is really strange for them to have like such a major character, especially like in the second one, he's such a major character, and yeah, for him to just not really, there's like no setup really in the first one, in terms of like, you just don't really see him. He's not really like, he's mentioned more than he's seen, and yeah, I guess it does have the benefit of that extra year probably between like the films coming out, probably like I imagine at that time as well, like technology probably had leapt on just far enough that they were able to do what they did, rather than like the year before it might have been like almost impossible to actually make it work.
Because they filmed the movies kind of back to back, didn't they?
They did, and then they went back, and I think there was like loads of reshoots and stuff, because I remember Peter Jackson talking about the fact that they were filming stuff for the extended versions, and yeah, I think at one point it was like on the last day of shooting, and I think he almost like didn't really want to just like call cut on the whole thing and actually wrap up the production. And I think someone was like, look, we probably should stop making this movie because it won Best Picture like a month ago. He's like, okay, fair enough. And just called it there.
That's funny.
But yeah, so obviously Golem was my first sort of major pick, and my second one, which was another sort of CG heavy character, it was Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Good choice.
Because again, like just as a kid, seeing Bill Nye as well, of all people, as this big like squid faced, like sort of crustaceous, pirate was really something else. And it's almost like Jeffrey Rush in the first Pirates of the Caribbean does such a good job of like obviously being a good foil to Jack Sparrow and everything, but when you have at the end of the day, like it's kind of known that Pirates movies were as successful as they were because of Johnny Depp and that performance, which just blew everyone away. And again, was another thing that it's why people saw the movies really. And I kind of love that it's almost like for the second one they've gone, well, we've got this absolute character of our like protagonist effectively. How do we possibly balance that with like, especially because they had to come up with a new villain, how do we possibly balance that? And they're like, well, rather than trying to find someone who's going to be like as mental as him in their own way, let's just make it let's just do a different thing. Let's just sort of shift it. So you've got like Johnny Depp, who's like a really vivid and a really sort of like just this really like vibrant character, and then opposite him you just have like this. And Davy Jones is quite sort of like I guess sort of grounded, and there's not a lot of like, he's not as kinetic, he's not as like, he doesn't move around as much, he's a lot sort of like firm, and but he just has like visually he's just got like so much going on.
That's true.
And they tie that in so well with like the design of his crew and his ship. And again, it's one of those things that like there's so much of that movie just leaning on those effects, and it is ridiculous like how well in like 2006 that they were able to pull that off, because it's not even in the case of Golem, you have like a character who's like a sort of skinny almost like human-esque character, but with Davy Jones you literally have like a beard full of tentacles that are always sort of moving around and doing their own thing, and then in the like behind them you have like two other fish people who have like different things going on with their sort of faces, and just again there's so many different things going on in terms of effects work, and even trying to find that balance of like, okay, well, how do we make this convincing but not obtrusive, and how do we make it that we're not really taking, that it's not all you're thinking about when you're watching the movie, but it really like sells you on the authenticity. And again, I think they absolutely nailed it.
That's such a good pick as well, because especially like you were talking about his crew, I think going really CGI heavy with like Davy Jones and his crew, and then with Bootstrap Bill, obviously he's just Stellan Skarsgård, but he's got like makeup on.
Yeah.
Which I think works because he's the most kind of like human one. He's the one that still has like human emotions, and he feels bad for people and stuff like that. So him not being CGI'd makes like, just creates this massive big rift within like Davy Jones' crew as well, which is really clever.
That's a really, really good point, and I'm now really bitter that I've never noticed that and thought about that before. That is actually that makes so much sense. And now you saying that makes me believe that it must have been intentional, but it also quite easily could have not been. But that is it is a really nice, like, just this really subtle sort of simple way to just sort of denote like the differences in his place and that crew.
Definitely. But no, those were really good choices. That's so funny because I was just watching a thing, and it was like a comparison between like Bill Nye performing as Davy Jones and then the actual finish thing. Weird.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But no, that was really good. So my choice is also pretty obvious, and I have gone in my notes. I have written liquid metal guy from Terminator 2, also known as T-1000. I googled it so I wouldn't sound completely uncultured. But yeah, this is another one where I, as we know from last time, haven't seen the movie, but I've seen that clip of him kind of walking out of the flame and becoming the policeman. I have seen that so many times that I knew, like, it came to mind almost straight away. I knew what movie it was, I knew, like, what he was, kind of thing. I think it's funny as well because obviously last week we were talking about James Cameron and how he's really into, like, his effects, and he'll notoriously sit on projects for so long until the effects become like available to him that are going to look good, which I think is definitely, it's kind of like in the Fincher category of like almost like commitment to his craft or whatever, that he's like, I've got a good project here, I'm just going to sit and wait it out. Exactly. And I think it's nice as well because he did an earlier film called The Abyss, which was the first film that had like kind of water effects in it.
Okay.
Which is, it's got like this scene where it's like it's just like this head kind of made of water, but it kind of like comes like this, and she's like talking to it, and it does look really, really good. But I think he's obviously kind of like honed that for a Terminator 2 because it's a similar kind of look. Obviously, it's metal as opposed to water, but I think it looks like, for its time, it came out in 1991, and it looks like, I think the effects would hold up today. Like, definitely. Especially, like, the way that he walks is a bit stilted, like, when he's coming out of the fire, but, like, his actual transition between the liquid and the man is, like, amazing. Especially for, like, the 90s, do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Like, I think it is something that, I've heard filmmakers talk about it a lot, where it's the Russo brothers sort of mentioned it when they briefly overtook Avatar as like the sort of highest gross. When Endgame overtook Avatar as like the highest grossing movie, they sort of made like an online post, a tribute to James Cameron, and just like all the times that they've been like blown away by his movies. And I'm pretty sure that it was like a screenshot from like his different films, different moments of different films of his when, and just like them sitting in the cinema being like, wow. And I think the screenshot for Terminator 2 was of that shot you're talking about, the liquid metal T-1000 coming out of the flames, because it is just like, at the time in particular, it must really have been like, wow, like this is where we've come with technology, like we can do anything. It must have been really cool, because obviously we're a bit spoiled now, where you watch a movie and you get like disappointed if it doesn't look real, but I imagine if you had gone to see that in the cinema, you would be well impressed, like, because there's a bit as well where he walks through like bars in a jail or something, and his gun gets like caught, and that bit alone is really cool. Like so I think if you'd seen that in the cinema, you'd really sort of... Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, they're really sort of inventive, and I think, again, that's like Terminator 2 is, like, it's one of my favourite films, and it works on so many different levels, and I think that's you know, that's one of the reasons it's regarded as such a classic, is it feels like no part of that movie isn't like pulling its weight, and but it's why the Terminator franchise has sort of forever been chasing the highs of that entry, because like not only does it have like, there's so many other things going on that it could have really afforded to kind of not do any of that stuff with the villain, but the fact that James Cameron actually took the time and came up with a new sort of spin on, rather than just going like, okay, because you already have the Terminator, like, rather than just going like, we're just gonna reuse that thing that we didn't really have enough money to even like properly show in the first one. I think it's like stop motion at the end. In the first Terminator when they do it. I think so. So even that is like ridiculous to think of, that like in the first one, it's very obviously sort of practical effects and a sort of stop motion, like briefly seen robotic skeleton to a man made of liquid metal that's just never been done in a movie before.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like, do you know when the first Terminator came out? I don't know when it was.
It was in the
off top of
80s.
my
I
head.
couldn't tell you when.
80s.
I know there was a big gap between 1 and 2. Like you were saying with James Cameron, like sitting on things until technology catches up. I know that I think it might have been like early 80s because The Terminator was his first film as a director. Which exactly. Which kind of makes it all the more impressive that like Terminator 2, he's literally like changing the game of effects.
I know, that's
So,
crazy.
very
I
good
think
pick.
it's funny as well because he's obviously like we've spoken about before, he's just gone on like just to like bigger and better heights, do you know what I mean, with like his CGI. So it's funny that even his very early work is amazing.
Yeah, exactly. He's nothing if not consistent in that way.
Yeah. But no, that sounds good. So moving on, this one, I think you said you had a bit of difficulty with this one, and with myself, it was that way we were talking where if you thought it was difficult to think of the first one, but then once I had thought of it, it just like absolutely solidified. So basically, this one we are going to be talking about the scariest CGI. So basically, CGI that we've seen that's maybe either particularly scary, particularly gory, or just horrifying in general. So basically our choice for scariest CGI, what properly, like, even though we knew it was fake, what properly scared us. So Sam, fire away, I'm buzzing.
This was as I said, this one was tough, but I really liked it as a category because it's such an interesting route to go down is scary CGI in such a specific route, and again like it leads into the whole subjectiveness of this topic. But yeah, like it sort of took me a while to really think of ones that it's funny because again like when I was like probably because like I'd already like come up with answers for the bad one. When I was trying to think of this, all I could think about were bad examples from like poor horrors, where I just like haven't been convinced by the effects, and it's really like sort of ruined the movie from being scary. But my sort of first pick was for something that isn't even like technically a horror. But like scared the life out of me, and that's the Pale Man in Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah.
The guy with obviously like the eyes in his hands, and like I mean the movie does such a good job of establishing like a really really brutal sort of dark tone, and it does a really interesting like again like blend of like fantasy and sort of realism and horror and just like even like the setup for the Pale Man with. Like the girl walks in and she's basically instructed to not eat any of the food, and she's kind of looking about, and it's basically like through these sort of drawings and through the set design as well. Like they sort of show that he just like eats children basically, this thing, and they do such a good job of like it's in one scene of the film, but it was pretty much all I could think about after seeing that movie. I think I was like 12 years old when I watched it on DVD, and it really really like struck me, and it's such a well realized. Obviously, it's a mix of like practical and CGI, where it is in part like a guy in a sort of suit, but that is what makes it work so well. Is it's using CGI to like minimal effect. It's using it for the sort of eyes and the hands idea, and that even that is just something that's like it's such a mental thing to do to design. And it's exactly the sort of thing that if you were like, there's a movie about a little girl and at one point she's chased by a guy that does this, you would be like, that there's no way on earth that is in any way scary, and it is so terrifying, and like it's such like a sort of striking. It is like the big like sequence of the movie for me because it's just so difficult to watch the first time.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's such a good point as well, because with the first time you see him, his hands are on the table and he just is kind of sitting there. So the fact that you don't see the CGI straight away just makes it even more scary when you do see it, because you think he's just maybe like because he kind of looks like a person, except that he's got no eyes, but I'm sure he's got like a mouth and that. But it's, yeah, him just kind of that picture of him just kind of sitting at the table, like lifeless almost, because it's not until, is it not, she takes like a berry or something, isn't it? And that's when
Yeah, I
he
think it's a grape sheets,
awakens.
and that's exactly.
Yeah.
And it's such a brilliant moment of, because it's such a simple. It's that whole, again, the way it's all like constructed, where she basically has to. The movie makes it so that she has to get as close to him as possible, and then yeah, she just eats one grape and thinking sort of how harmless could that be. But yeah, then this thing comes to life before her, and yeah, it's just, and then
That's
she
a
sort
good
of runs
choice.
down the
That's
corridor
really
and she's
scary.
yeah, yeah. So that was, yeah, as I said, my sort of first pick,
Mm-hmm.
as something that like utterly horrified me, and my second was probably more unconventional pick.
Okay.
But it's, yeah, it like, so my second pick, I'm just gonna go right into it. Was basically the Polar Express, and that like I kind of feel bad for picking the movie, but
Don't
it
feel
really
bad
did.
because I hate that movie. And part of the reason is the awful effects. Like, I hate
Yes,
it. Everyone in my
it's so
family will tell you that I
it's
detest
so
that movie. Like, I
creepy.
don't even let people watch it when I'm in the room.
Yeah, I don't. I think I've seen it the once. I think I've literally seen it like once or twice, and I think it's maybe. I think like you say, it's one of those things that obviously is on TV at Christmas time, and most. I love like when Christmas films are on at Christmas time.
Yeah.
Christmas time, and it's a nice like sort of vibe, and it's nice to kind of walk into a room and there's like a film on. You kind of sit down and just watch some of it or watch the end of it if it's a really good film. And yeah, the Polar Express is one. If I walk in a room, the Polar Express is on. Getting out of that
Yep,
room.
I'm leaving.
It's just. It's
Such a
just.
good choice.
It's the movie. The movie is going for everything. Like the movie's going for the complete opposite of what it delivers on. It's going for this really sort of exciting and heartwarming sort of adventure and into like the North Pole with like Tom Hanks as the conductor, and it just comes out as horrible.
That is so
It's just
funny.
there's this horrible uncanny valley thing of, yeah, they went like, and that's the thing, like especially at the time, like I remember like I think seeing like a trailer for it and just thinking like the train in the snow and just thinking that looks so real for like an animated movie. Like it really, like, they obviously, like, that was like put so much time and effort into. They really are like pushing like what like CGI can do with like animated movies. And then you watch the film and it's just so awful.
That's so funny.
And it's such a long movie as well, so you're in it,
Yeah.
or maybe it's not. I've not rewatched it, but to me it felt like it was close to 3 hours that they're
Yeah,
like on that train, and
100%.
it just a really long time to live in that world with those horrible looking like animated characters.
That's so funny because there's hundreds of them. Because I remember there being loads of children on the train, and then Tom Hanks's character's in it. Like he's like 3 or 4 different characters, and it's just awful.
Yeah, there's like a horrible. I'm sure there's a horrible, creepy sort of puppeteer guy at one point.
I honestly
And
can't
yeah,
even remember that bit.
as if I mean, maybe I'm making this up. Maybe in my head it's got worse. The movie.
Yeah.
I can't revisit it to find out. So
You're like
now that
blending
you
it with
apparently.
nightmares.
Yeah, yeah. How much of this did the movie have, and how much of this did I just create afterwards in my brain? But yeah, like it just. But yeah, the movie didn't lead. If the puppet man is in there, and again, I'm never going to check to find out.
No.
But the movie didn't need to do that. The movie had enough going for it as it was in terms of creepiness. Didn't need a creepy sequence.
Yeah, I'm like, why would you think this movie's already pretty creepy? Do you know what would make it amazing? A child catcher-esque character.
Exactly.
Because everyone loves a child catcher. That's such a good point as well that it's a Christmas movie, because like that somehow makes it worse. Do you know what I mean? Imagine showing your kids
Oh, so
that,
much
or-
worse. Yeah, it's supposed to be so pure and so like, yeah, it's supposed to be like nice and heartwarming, and you're supposed to feel really good about yourself and good about life and everything, and watching
Yeah.
it. But it just makes you want to kind of like batten down the hatches and curl up and not watch
just
any
cancel
movies from
Christmas. Like, no, I'm not.
Yeah,
If that's what it's gonna look like, I'm not having any of it.
I want no part in this.
Yeah. Wow, that was such an amazing choice. I'm so glad you brought that up because I hate that movie and my little sister loves it. And if she watches it, I'm going to be so validated that it's not just me that hates it. So
feel
thank
for
you for
you.
that.
You're very welcome.
I think I've gone down a pretty different path from my choice. Basically, my choice is in the movie Annihilation.
Oh, okay.
But first of all, I'll talk about the crocodile. And I think if you've seen the movie, you know where I'm going after that. But the
Yeah.
crocodile, I remember, I think because the movie's, it's quite, there's a fair amount of CGI in it. And I think because the movie focuses a lot of it on like the shimmer is like gorgeous and it looks, it's like
Yeah.
really pretty and everything and it's lovely colours. And then at one point they're kind of walking around and she's standing in the doorway of like this cabin kind of thing. And I rewatched the clip just to make sure that it was scary, and it was because it properly jumped out my skin again watching it, and she's kind of like yanked back into it. And the good thing about that is it's kind of like the Jaws thing we were talking about, where you don't see what's got her for a while, and you just kind of see the water thrashing about and stuff like that. But when you do see it, it's like a giant albino crocodile thing. And obviously, crocodiles are pretty scary. The fact that it's ginormous is also pretty scary. And then it's like on the banks and it's
Yeah.
making its way towards Natalie Portman. And it like opens its mouth and it's got this horrible like have you seen the movie It?
Yes,
Like the
I
new
have.
one. You know the bit where he kind of opens his mouth and it's just
Yeah.
all teeth? The crocodile was kind of like that as well, which was pretty scary, and obviously it reminded me
Yeah.
of It. Which was giving me the kind of horror vibes and everything. So that was my first choice. But the second and scariest part of that movie was the mutated bear.
Yeah.
That
oh
thing
my god.
was so scary. Like, I remember I was watching it, and I was watching it by myself, and it was nighttime, and I had like, I wanted to get this cinema vibe, so I had all the lights off, and I was just sitting there, and it was that way where I could feel the panic like starting to build, and it was getting scarier and scarier and scarier, and I was sitting in the house and I was like, oh my god. Even though I knew it was a CGI thing and it was a mutated bear,
Yeah.
so even if for some reason a bear did manage to get into the flat, it wouldn't be mutated like that, so it wouldn't be quite as horrifying. But it was so scary. And when I was rewatching it as well, like it's horrifying before you even see it, because it does that thing where it like screams in other people's voices. So like you think that
That's
it's
right, yeah.
you think that it's their pal, and oh god, one of the girls goes out to, because she thinks it's her pal, and she goes out to see it, and this is after she's tied 3 of the other women to chairs because she's going a bit. She's a bit highly strung. It's a bit tense situation. So she's tied them all to chairs, and then she runs out to go and see if it's her pal that's gone missing, basically. And then there's just this 1 minute where you hear like it changes from a scream to a roar, or a growl or whatever. And then that's when it comes. I think she runs back in, and the bear comes in, and it's so scary. It's got like the body of a bear, but his face is all like elongated, and it's quite skull-like, and it doesn't really look like there's a lot of like flesh or anything on it, and it's got these horrible big like dripping teeth and everything. The teeth actually reminded me of that bit in Alien, but like a more extreme version because they're a lot bigger. But
Yeah.
those kind of vibes, and I think it makes it even scarier because they're sitting tied to the chair, so there's no way that they can escape. There's also that thing where you know what, you would kind of know how a bear would react, but you're not going to know how this weird mutated bear is going to react. I just thought it was so
Well, exactly.
scary. And then once
Yeah.
it does
No, I
attack
think
one of them, it's so like violent and like visceral, and it's just so scary.
Yeah. No, I think like really, really good pick actually. I've seen Annihilation. I watched it a few years ago. And yeah, like as soon as you mentioned the movie, first thing I thought of was that bear.
Yeah.
And I guess as you say, like almost like the movie sort of is the movie uses CGI in such a beautiful way and so many other sequences that it really sort of like catches you off guard. It really sort of like, yeah, you know, you don't, and the movie's not really like I guess it's not really framed like a horror. It's not really like, loads of creepy scares. And I think as well, like, I think really when you think about it, there's not actually a whole lot in cinema of like really sort of good creature design, like really good. I mean, like really like you remember it well after the movie, and you do talk about it on like a podcast, sort of creature design, and the fact that that movie has like two examples of like really really strong like creatures, because it's not even just like in the design, it's also like, as you're sort of saying, with like the sort of sound they use and stuff like that and everything like but the fact that it like has that in there and just doesn't really use it that much is so like ridiculously brilliant, because like again, like a sort of lesser movie would a lesser filmmaker would just have the movie be about the creepy bear, the creepy sort of alligator or crocodile rather, and these things work so well because you get like small glimpses of them, but like, and as you said, like the bear as well, like almost like it uses your imagination against you and makes you sort of imagine. And a lot of times movies do that, like Jaws, in particular, as you mentioned before. Like a lot of that, like you not seeing the shark is what makes it scary, and that's usually that's kind of as far as it goes. Usually, like a lot of things you can, when it comes to actually seeing the thing, you're kind of like, oh, well, I'm not really scared of it anymore. Especially now that, with the CGI, you're kind of like, well, now that I can see that now that my brain's able to detect that that's not real, you kind of stop being scared, but. With when you see it as well, you're still just like, nope, that's about as horrible as I thought it was gonna be.
Yep, at 100%. I remember I'd suggested it to someone at work, and they had watched it, and I was like, "What did you think?" And they were like, "That bear," like. They had the same kind of instance watching it where it was dark and it was late at night, and it was just like the only way I can describe it is that you can feel the panic like building in your chest, and it's so weird.
I definitely watched that sequence during the day, and I'm glad I did, because I don't think I'd be able to handle that late at night, because it's such a brilliant scene of tension, and it's such a terrifying like use of effects, but like done so brilliantly.
They have like this like POV shot as well from one of the characters, and it's just the bear like face on, and that's all you can see on the screen, and it lasts like just that second too long for it to make you really uncomfortable.
As if that's needed as well.
Yeah, this was after we've already seen the bear kind of parading around. I was like, I've seen enough of it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like, just going back to again, we've obviously talked about like a sort of myriad of like examples of CGI, and some good, some bad, and it takes a lot of bravery. Yeah, it takes a lot of guts to kind of like to lean into the effects that much, and to not sort of worry that they're going to disappoint, but like like they really like and not just make the scene but elevate it.
Definitely. But no, that was horrifying. So on that note, I'll move on quickly.
Fair.
So our second to last choice was a movie that we thought had some of the least needed CGI. So a movie that we were watching it and we were like, why did they bother CGI in that? Or there was no need for that. It would have maybe... I mean, again, I'm slightly biased because I think that most things would be better with practical effects. But, again, it'd be interesting to see what your personal choice was for this one.
Again, I very much align with your view on like my sort of opinion on CGI generally is like it's not really needed. I mean, again, you have examples like Fincher and stuff like that, but they're the exception, not so much the rule. And usually you do kind of feel like, okay, this wasn't really necessary. And I had some sort of examples that came to mind, but I also just kind of like, just for the fun of it, did sort of some research on this one, just because I was curious, like maybe like what there was out there that I wasn't really aware of. So I'm going to go over just like a couple, because I've not really seen the films that I haven't seen, and then one that I have seen that I can talk about a bit more. So the first one was the movie Your Highness, which is like a sort of medieval-esque comedy starring, I think, Danny McBride, James Franco, and Natalie Portman. I think it came out in like 2011. And apparently there's like a scene in the film where Natalie Portman's like getting changed, I think, by like a waterfall or something, and she's just like in her underwear and kind of turns around and you can see her butt. And then they used that scene for the trailer, but like CGI'd some like trousers on, and it was just the sort of thing that I was reading about it was just like, why didn't they just not have the scene in the trailer?
In the trailer, yeah.
Like,
You know, you can
need
decide what's in the trailer, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't need to show that. Like, if there's an issue with them showing this, yeah, like it's very easy to just not have that in there. It's really, you would think if they were going to, because then, like, you almost think like that's the sort of scene when you see that in a movie, you're almost like, oh, they put that in there to advertise it, to really get people to come and see it, because they're like, oh, you can see Natalie Portman's butt, but to go the other way with it and to go, yeah, no, we're going to cover her up, but like, why put the scene in that? Surely that just looks really weird in the context of the trailer, because it's just her standing in front of like a bit of water. And,
wear trousers?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was one that I kind of thought was a bit bizarre, and definitely like unnecessary. And then another one was in Superman Returns, I think it is. I think it's 2006 with Christopher Reeve. I've never seen it. Apparently, they used CGI to reduce the size of his penis. Yeah, just within like apparently he was like fairly well endowed, and just
like
to kind of
his like suit thing.
Within his suit, yeah, like just to make the bulge smaller. I guess to make people more comfortable, but
Wow.
it's just such a weird like, because there must have been like, for that to have happened, there would have to be conversations about that, like extensive conversations. And imagine being like the effects team who get to work on like the new Superman movie, and imagine just being like the part of that effects team that's delegated. So for the whole movie, we want you to frame by frame go around and just like see that crotch area, really narrow in on that, and just make that smaller.
That's amazing. I love that, because from like experience of like editing, and the longest thing I've edited was what, like 12 minutes maybe, if that. I think that's been a bit generous. And I remember editing it and being like, looking at the actor's face and being like, I am sick of seeing this guy's face. Can you imagine what it would be like? I'd be like, I'm sick of seeing this. Imagine that was your working day, all day, every day. Wow.
Oh, I know. Imagine going home to like wife and kids, and I'd be, how was your day at work, and just another 12 hours in the computer in front of just staring, just trying to make it smaller. The nightmares that have been had. But yeah,
surely you'd be so chuffed if you were the actor, though. That'd be funny. You'd be like telling everyone like, that's CGI. Yeah, they made it smaller.
Bragging rights for or no. What would be so much worse would be if they hadn't told him, if they hadn't had any conversation with him that this was going to happen, and he's watching the movie and he notices it, because then you can imagine him sitting there with friends and he's like, they've made that smaller.
Yeah.
Because no one's ever gonna. Yeah, of course. Yeah, like they're actually gonna. Someone's gonna sit in front of a computer and like actually shrink it down, frame by frame. Yeah,
that's
sure.
Such a good point.
Like, no, I swear. Like when we filmed it was so much bigger. So yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Those were two that I hadn't seen that I thought were very, very strange. And then one that I have, again, another sort of mainstream choice, is the Star Wars film Rogue One, where they used and again like they effectively like are pioneering a technology, and it didn't really like, I know for some people it kind of broke the film for them, where they like basically de-aged, where they effectively resurrected Peter Cushing and sort of de-aged Carrie Fisher for that movie, and it like, you can tell it is effects, you can tell it is CGI. And it, again, like it did really sort of like push what technology can do, and it's the reason that like the anti-aging thing has been in like more films, and is now like people aren't as afraid of it. Like The Irishman basically exists because they were able to they did it first with Rogue One. But I think like the thing that's really weird about it is like I remember hearing rumors like in the sort of lead up to the release of the movie, where like there was reports of them spending like millions. I think it was like 50, at least like sort of 50. It's like 50 million was like the figure thrown around that it was like going to cost just to have Peter Cushing in this movie. And I remember just thinking like, that's such a weird thing to do, because like in the context of Star Wars films, they have recast people like before. They've done it like quite a few times. Like Bail Organa is in episode 3. He was obviously recast. They've had Anakin Skywalker recast. They'd like even like within the like Disney owning Star Wars, like the next spin-off movie they did was a Han Solo movie where they'd recast Han Solo.
Yeah.
So it's such a weird move to digitally resurrect Peter Cushing for the sake of like, I think it's like one scene that he's in, or one or two scenes. And it's so bizarre because it's not like, I don't think I've ever heard of a Star Wars fan, as much as Star Wars fans love to complain about everything, I don't think I've ever heard a Star Wars fan or heard of a Star Wars fan who would kick off if they didn't use Peter Cushing for the movie. Like, they know he's dead. He was a very minor character and very minor role to begin with. If they just had a different actor playing him, I don't think anyone would have been like, oh well, since they didn't resurrect Peter Cushing, the movie was a disaster.
That absolutely ruined the movie for me.
Yeah, it just, I don't know why they felt the need to do it. Was the really weird part about it. It was just, and I think that's maybe why there were rumours about it, and I think everyone was kind of like, surely that's not a thing, because that's so much money to spend on something that no one's asking for.
That's true. That's really bizarre.
But yeah, so those are my choices.
But good choice.
Thank you.
Mine was again like a kind of personal thing, and I have gone for the re-release of the movie E.T. because basically Spielberg re-released it for its 20th anniversary, and E.T. suddenly had this horrifying like CGI face, and it was so jarring. Like, you know how the bit when you first see him and he's in like Elliot's in like the kind of field thing and he flashes the torch onto E.T.'s face and E.T. starts screaming. Now it's like this weird, and it's not even like the colour of the CGI doesn't quite match the colour of E.T.'s body. So it's jarring. And I remember like I've got the DVD of it, and it gives you the option to watch like the original like theatrical release, and I would always choose that because it's so, I don't know why, I just think it's so weird because it did so well when it came out. He's such like a kind of lovable kind of character, and everyone, like, you know what he looks like, you know what to expect when you're watching E.T. He's just like a weird alien guy, and he looks like a weird alien guy, but he also looks kind of like, I feel like watching the original E.T., there's not a point where I'm like, he's not emoting enough. I don't understand what E.T.'s feeling just now. Do you know what I mean? So there's no need. It'd be different if he was completely stiff and static, but like the original kind of E.T., like his face moves, you can tell what he's feeling. I just thought it was such a weird, annoying choice.
As you say, like, as you say, like, mate, Spielberg, you've done it. You've released the movie and people liked it and it made loads of money. Like, why would you then, to then be like, okay, but now let's use a computer to really mess up E.T.'s face. Yeah. Like, it's just, so I thought you were going a different route with that. Because was there not, I literally have only seen E.T. as a kid, and I think either only the once or only really in bits and pieces, and I think genuinely because I remember it being really emotional and just never having the compulsion to go through that that ride again. I was like, once is enough. Okay, I know what happens. But I'm sure there's a thing where I think it might have been for the same re-release, they edited. So they're being chased at the end, aren't they, by like sort of security or
police,
government agents, and they've got guns. But they did like an edit where they replaced the guns with phones.
Yeah, it's like walkie-talkies.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. And, like, what?
I've actually got notes on that. It's because I read a thing that Spielberg himself had said that's one thing that he regretted about it. That it seemed a bit much to be chasing kids with guns. Like, there's one guy who's got like a giant big rifle. Like he's gonna shoot them out the sky. You know what I mean? As they're cycling away.
That's brilliant. It is very, very America though, isn't it? Like, I fully buy into the reality of
Yeah,
that.
like, do you know that way watching it, I would like, yeah, they probably would.
There is an alien involved.
Exactly. Oh, but yeah, I thought the ET's face thing really bothered me because I watched a video and it was the comparison between what they had changed, and there was some things again which seemed unnecessary, like they changed the angle of like certain shots for when they're cycling through the air. I'm like, well, we knew that they weren't actually cycling through the air, so that worked fine. Do you know what I mean? We all kind of we appreciated it at the time, so
Yeah.
it was just the whole thing.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
the whole thing was just weird. Like the movie was
Yeah,
good. The movie's amazing.
yeah, no, exactly. A very good pick, and yeah, it is it's like literally like such a good example of again like a good sort of creature design with ET, and that the whole movie relies on you buying into the existence of ET. So yeah, it's just weird to then feel the need to do that to his face and to change it up as if people didn't believe in ET when it first came out, but obviously they really did. And just make these weird changes that are just unnecessary. But then I guess kind of again goes hand in hand with George Lucas doing that with Star Wars, and him and Spielberg are best buddies. So
yeah, I just think it's funny as well. It's maybe that thing where obviously when I grew up watching ET, like I've seen it so many times, so there's maybe that nostalgia element where I'm like, why did you change that? Because it was perfect.
Yeah.
But I do still, I think
a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah. I think as well, for a movie that was so successful, why would you change any of it? Do you know what I mean? No one was complaining. No one was like, E.T. doesn't look real.
Exactly. And I guess that sort of shows the I guess, you hear like sort of filmmakers and artists talk about that, is that sort of like, you never feel like you're I guess goes back to Peter Jackson's, like in the extended editions to Lord of the Rings, you kind of never feel like you're done with something. You never feel like you've nailed it. You always feel like you can improve it, you can tweak it. And I guess that's the danger of having the sort of power and the ability to do that with your movies is. And what you then risk doing is actually ruining the thing, or taking away from the thing by actually like tinkering with it further. Because like sometimes you have just like, well, a lot of times if with a movie like E.T., certainly you have just nailed it on the first go, and everything about that movie worked and led to its success and its believability. So to then tweak things about it is just making people uncomfortable in a really like unnecessary way.
Yeah, definitely. Weird choice. So that brings us on to our last topic, which is kind of, so we've talked about like the least needed CGI. So I wanted to think about times where maybe like a scene or a movie or a character would have been enhanced with the use of CGI. This one for me was super difficult, so I don't know how you got on, Sam. And I do apologise.
No, I had a really hard time with this one as well. I really appreciated like as like a sort of experiment, like thinking about it. I appreciated the sort of mental exercise, but I honestly like I didn't feel like I could come up with a good answer. Because I know what will happen is like probably the next film I'll watch, I'll be like, oh my god, this was it. Or a million and one things will like flood into my brain, as is always the case. But my sort of missed opportunity wasn't so much. I kind of cheated and bent it a little bit, because my missed opportunity wasn't so much something where I felt like CG was kind of needed, and actually I feel like the CG itself, like technically, was like sort of almost like mind-blowingly good, but it's a missed opportunity because it's not ever talked about in the way that it should be, and it's because of the movie sort of failing to deliver. And again, it's another really, really, really obvious choice, and ties into the my last choice as well, with sort of least needed, and this is Jar Jar Binks in Star Wars.
Yeah,
and I think it's probably the biggest missed opportunity in terms of like, we talked about, obviously I talked about Golem and that sort of pioneering like motion capture and having like a sort of convincing CG sort of like character basically. And it's funny because Star Wars only came a couple years before the Lord of the Rings, or I suppose like 3 years before Two Towers. But I feel like, you know, if for everything that like Golem probably like brought on this like rush and excitement of like what effects can do, Jar Jar probably scared people off. But when you watch the movie, when you watch scenes with Jar Jar Binks, the thing is I don't think the character, like, I think the character looks, it's a really weird design, a really alien design. I think it looks really convincing, especially for the time. I think it like there is a real believability in the effects that they used. Or I do think they're actually stunning, but they're just never appreciated because of the fact that Jar Jar as a character, as a creation,
that's a good point. Yeah, everyone hates him, don't they?
Exactly, and that's all he is just like there's so much hatred for that character, and yeah, it's just a shame because if he'd been, again, you look at the early Star Wars films and you have like Darth Vader and you have Yoda, you have these like sort of weird creations, C-3PO and R2-D2, these weird sort of creations that sort of shouldn't work, and they do. And you know, when they were making those movies, obviously George Lucas was basically told over and over again, this isn't going to work, you know, you can't, these movies are never going to succeed. Everyone thought they were sort of pulpy and terrible and for kids, and then in a lot of ways they are for kids, but and it must have been the same kind of going into the prequel trilogy and starting off with Jar Jar, and there must have been a large element of people being like, this seems like a really weird approach to take, but the guy's done it before, so you know, we absolutely trust in his vision. But yeah, he didn't quite manage to land his delivery with Jar Jar, and it is a shame because like you would just be the thing that's talked about. If it had gone well, then it like he would be the big influential thing, and not so much Golem. Golem would still be talked about, but just not to the same extent, I think.
No, that's a good choice. That's one that I wouldn't have come up with. Very interesting.
Thank you. I just had to throw some love out there for my man Jar Jar.
Yeah, of course. I think like I was saying, this one was really difficult. But the thing that I came up with was the character of Voldemort in Harry Potter.
Okay.
Because as a fan of the books, it always kind of annoys me that they didn't, like in the books it's explicitly said again and again that his eyes are red and that he's got the snake-like slit in them, and it's just like, I get why everyone moans about Harry's eyes not being green, and I get it, he was a child, the contact lenses didn't agree with his eyes, fair enough. But Voldemort came out, like, when he shows up really in Goblet of Fire, which is far enough down the line that they could have made his, you know, that way they've eliminated his nose, they might as well have made his eyes red. I think as well another thing.
First scene where you.
Sorry?
I was just gonna say, even the first scene where you see Voldemort is so CG heavy because he like morphs out of a cauldron, doesn't he? And then the sort of his cloak forms on him. So yeah, like they're not afraid of using the effects for Voldemort. Yeah. So yeah, it is weird to just like to just let it go with the eyes.
I think a really interesting thing they could have done, and this kind of reminded me, remember in that podcast, I can't remember which one it was, but you spoke about the Harry Potter movie where it showed like the actors' faces as it progressed through the years. I thought it would have been really interesting if maybe during like Half-Blood Prince or Deathly Hallows they'd had some kind of element where you saw like Voldemort's transition from like Tom Riddle into Voldemort, like the way that his face changed and he became less human. I think that would really have highlighted how evil he was and how far he'd gone in the kind of opposite direction to where there was so little left of him that was human that he physically didn't even look like a human anymore. I think that would have been...
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think that's such a good point actually, because they almost like the book of Half-Blood Prince is all really, the point of it is to go into the backstory of Voldemort and as you say, it's all about his loss of humanity and it would have been, as you say, like such a good opportunity to, they have, and that's the thing. I almost wasn't on board with you when you started talking there, because I was like, I love the design of Voldemort.
Yeah.
Like, that was it's one of the things that I remember seeing Goblet of Fire and remember genuinely thinking like I've absolutely nailed this. You know, they've done such a good job of making him look scary and like, and again, he's sort of got this unique design and yeah, like they missed such an opportunity in not really leaning into that and not, as you say, like showing that transformation, since the book already had that stuff in there anyway. Would have been a great way to really like capitalize on the work that they'd done.
Yep. I think obviously I love the movies and the books, but I think the movies can sometimes be quite guilty of assuming that people have read the books. So there's bits, like I think his appearance, had you never read the books, his appearance in the movies would be weird, and you would think, why does he look like a snake and why does he not have a nose? Whereas if you've read the books, you understand this. So for a point in the movie, just so that everyone would understand, if they'd kind of showed his progression while they were talking about how he's not really a man anymore, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly, and I think as well, even with like it makes so much sense that what the books obviously cleverly did was they made the penultimate one about Voldemort and really sort of establishing who he was and really like contextualizing him and giving you as much information about him as was really necessary, and it means that you there's so much more of an understanding going into the last one, and they do admit that and I guess like you say, like especially the later movies in particular are really bad for just assuming that you've read the books, because the sixth book is effectively in a lot of ways all about Voldemort, and the seventh book was in a lot of ways all about Dumbledore, and they kind of omitted the Dumbledore stuff from the seventh one as well, and it's a shame because they're those two sort of like, those are two of the most like interesting characters, and those are the two sort of juiciest parts of the book. Really is when you suddenly, after all this time, all this build up, you finally get to sort of like delve into these characters and what sort of made them who they are. And again, it is just a really, really good choice of missed opportunity, because it is such a missed opportunity to not have really, again, through the medium of film, like, and that's such a visual idea, such a visual way of like of quickly showing you what the books sort of painstakingly describe.
Because you could obviously visually you wouldn't want it to take up, like, you don't need that much depth necessarily in a movie as you do in the book. So obviously there's like filmmaking techniques where you can omit some of that, blah blah blah, and I think that would just have been a nice way. It could have been like a 30-second little segment, do you know what I mean? And it would have just explained why he looked the way he did.
Exactly, and just a really good way of showing like just really hammering home that this is the same person and this is who he was, and this is who he became and how he became it. And it's not just, you're not just looking at like because it's I guess I think that's one of the things, is like it was always a joke when the movies were out or coming out, and the movies were like obviously like being shown and stuff like that, and people always made jokes about Voldemort having no nose. And it's it's because of the fact that it's like you say, they don't do any work, and they show you him as a little kid basically, and then like I think maybe once as like a sort of teenager, and then they show you him as like adult bald snake like Voldemort, but they don't ever bridge it. It does seem really weird, and you're just kind of left thinking, oh, he's not got a nose. That's really funny. That looks really silly. Like because there needed to be work done to actually make you go, no, this is a person. And this is how he became that way, and this is why it's not a silly design. This is why it's like an important design, because it's a huge facet of his character. It's almost like in the movies, it's almost like, well, he just looks like that because he's the bad guy. Whereas there is actually a narrative reason for it.
It is because he's evil, but there's a reason that he it's not just because he's bad and suddenly his nose fell off.
Exactly.
But no, I think CGI is a funny one, because I feel like we could talk about this for days on end. But I will wrap up there for this time. I think obviously there's a couple of little clips and scenes in that I'll try and find and pop in the description, especially the Jaws 3D one, just so everyone can have a good laugh.
Don't forget to get ones from the Polar Express. I'm
not looking into anything for that movie. People can fend for themselves for that one. I'm not having anything to do with that. But yeah,
We're
no, I'll
sparing
put
them,
like a
really.
wee list of like movies and stuff like that we've talked about in the comments. And yeah, so next time it's Sam's shot again. So I'm excited to see what you've come up with. That'll be good. But yeah, unless
It'll be a
Sam,
very
unless you
novel
have
idea, I'm
anything,
sure.
yeah, unless you have anything other to say, I think we should say goodbye.
I feel like we've talked a lot about CGI, and it's been a great discussion. But yeah, I feel like we've captured sort of all aspects of it quite nicely. So
Cool.
I'm happy to wrap things up here.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we shall see you guys in 2 weeks. See ya.
Yeah, farewell.